My son Callum stood at the head of the dinner table in his new downtown condo, holding up a glass of wine in front of his colleagues and his girlfriend's family, and told everyone in the room that his success was entirely self-made. I was sitting 3 chairs away, holding a fork I never used, thinking about the second mortgage I had quietly signed 11 months earlier. If you've ever given everything you had to someone you loved, only to become invisible in their story, please like this video and subscribe. Tell me in the comments what you would have done. And let me know where you're watching from. I read every single one. My husband Leonard died on a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of morning where the sky over Vancouver Island turns the color of pewter and the air smells like wet cedar and cold salt. He had been a marine electrician for 31 years. Not glamorous work, not well paid in the way people mean when they say well paid, but steady. Honest. The kind of work where a person leaves the house before sunrise and comes home smelling like diesel and sea air, and never once complains about either. Leonard died of a stroke at 64. He was supposed to retire the following spring. We had a small house in Sydney, British Columbia, the kind of house that gets called cozy in real estate listings, but really just means the kitchen and the living room share the same air. We had a manageable mortgage, a vegetable garden that Leonard tended every weekend, like it was a religious obligation, and 37 years of a quiet, reliable life together. After he died, I found out exactly how careful Leonard had been. A small life insurance policy. The house paid down to almost nothing, and a savings account he had never touched, earmarked, in his careful handwriting on the folder inside the filing cabinet, for Callum's future. Callum was our only child. He was 28 when Leonard died, and had been working in marketing at a mid-sized tech firm in Victoria. He was smart, charming in social situations, and deeply certain, even then, that he was built for something larger than what he had. I don't say that as criticism. I believed it too. About 8 months after Leonard's funeral, Callum came home for dinner on a Sunday. It was February, the kind of gray, relentless February that makes even people who love the West Coast quietly question their choices. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I had just eaten alone for the 200th night in a row. And he looked at me with the particular expression I recognized from his childhood. The one that meant he wanted something and had already rehearsed the asking. "Mom," he said, "I have an opportunity." He pulled out his laptop and showed me a website, a digital content studio he wanted to build, independent, his own. He had a business name already, Northline Creative, and a rented office space he'd been eyeing in downtown Victoria, and a plan that involved video production, brand storytelling, corporate content for small and medium businesses across BC and Alberta. I remember staring at the screen while he talked. He looked alive in a way he hadn't since before his father's death, maybe in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager who still believed the world was full of open doors. "What would you need to get started?" I asked. He told me. I didn't flinch. I should have asked more questions. But mothers don't always ask enough questions when their children look like that, like the world just opened a door for them again. Over the next several months, I helped Callum build Northline Creative from the ground up. I covered the first year of office rent. I helped purchase camera equipment, editing software, lighting rigs. I paid for a website developer. I dipped into Leonard's savings, the account with his careful handwriting on the folder, and I did it without telling Callum which account it came from, because I didn't want him to feel the weight of that. Those early months were genuinely good. Callum called me every few days. He sent me rough cuts of client videos asking what I thought. Once, he drove up to Sydney on a Saturday just to have lunch and walk along the waterfront because he said he needed to clear his head. I held on to those afternoons like pressed flowers. Then Jade Whitfield arrived. The first time Callum mentioned her, she was a brand consultant he'd brought on for a project. Then she was his girlfriend. Then she was, increasingly, the person making every decision inside Northline Creative, while Callum described those decisions to me like they were revelations. Jade says we need to reposition. Jade says the corporate market is too small. Says we should be targeting the luxury real estate sector. Jade Whitfield was 32, originally from Calgary, and had the kind of confident certainty that people often mistake for expertise. She was well-dressed, quick with business language, and had an instinct for making her opinions sound like industry consensus. I met her for the first time at a dinner Callum hosted in his new apartment, the downtown condo he'd moved into 6 months after starting the business, which I also helped cover the deposit on. She shook my hand warmly when I arrived. "You must be Evelyn. Callum talks about you constantly." I remember thinking that sounded like something a person practiced. Over the following months, Northline Creative began to change in ways I couldn't quite trace, but couldn't stop noticing. The original clients, small businesses, local nonprofits, a brewery in Saanich that Callum genuinely loved working with, were quietly let go. Jade said they weren't consistent with the brand elevation strategy. New invoices started arriving with names I didn't recognize: a photography studio rental, a brand identity firm in Vancouver, a luxury lifestyle photographer whose day rate I could not believe was real when I first saw it. Callum started asking for money more frequently. At first, the amounts felt temporary, a bridge loan until a big contract came through, a short-term investment to unlock a larger opportunity. Then the amounts grew. One evening in late autumn, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside me, looking at my bank statements. I had been helping Callum with transfers for almost 14 months. The numbers blurred together after a while. I picked up the phone and called him. "I just want to understand the full picture," I said carefully. "How are the actual revenues looking right now?" He paused half a second too long. "We're in a growth phase." "That's not what I asked." "Mom, this is how businesses work. You invest before you profit. I know that, but I want to see the numbers." His voice shifted slightly. "Jade handles most of the financial tracking. I can have her send something." That was the first time I understood the structure had changed. It was no longer Callum's company with Jade's input. It was Jade's strategy with Callum's name on the door. A few days later, I stopped by the Northline office while Callum was at a client meeting. Jade was there alone, reviewing something on a large monitor. She smiled brightly when I came in. "Evelyn, what a nice surprise. Can I make you a tea?" She moved around the office with a particular ease, not like a guest who had gradually stayed longer than expected, like someone who had decided it was hers. I set a box of butter tarts on the desk, from the bakery in Sydney that Leonard used to stop at on the way home on Fridays, and looked around the space. New furniture, a neon sign on the back wall with the studio name in a font I didn't recognize, and near the window, stacked carefully on a credenza, a set of branded folders with the logo for something called Whitfield Strategic Group. I pointed to them. "What's that?" Jade glanced over without much expression. "My consulting firm. I do some advisory work through it." "And Northline pays your consulting firm?" She smiled gently. "That's a standard business arrangement." I folded my hands in my lap. "How much?" She set down her mug carefully. "That's really a conversation for Callum." That wasn't my question. Something shifted in her eyes. Not anger, recalibration. The way people adjust when they realize a conversation didn't go the direction they planned. She said something polished about fiduciary efficiency and advisory structures and the Vancouver market. I nodded and ate a butter tart and went home and called my friend Harriet Bowman. Harriet was 71 and had been my closest friend since we met at a women's running group in 2003, and both quit after the third session and went for coffee instead. She was a recently retired chartered accountant and had a way of looking at documents the way surgeons look at X-rays, without sentiment, only clarity. "Describe everything," she said when I called. So I did, for nearly an hour. When I finished, Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then, she said, "Evelyn, I think you need to let me see the paperwork." She came over the following Saturday morning, with coffee from the Tim Hortons on the highway, and spent 3 hours at my kitchen table sorting through everything I had. Bank transfers, receipts, contracts Callum had emailed asking me to co-sign as a secondary financial reference. Harriet did not say much while she read. When she finally sat back, she took off her reading glasses and rubbed her eyes. "How much in total?" I told her. She didn't react dramatically. Harriet never did. But she set her coffee down very carefully, the way people do when they need a moment. "Evelyn, these invoices from Whitfield Strategic Group." She tapped one page. "The fee structure here isn't based on results. It's based on Northline's spending volume. The more Callum spends, the more she earns." The kitchen felt very quiet suddenly. "I don't think she's helping him build a business," Harriet said simply. "I think she's found someone who needs to feel like he's succeeding, and she's monetizing that." The sentence sat between us while snow fell very softly outside the kitchen window. That week, I drove to Nanaimo to meet with a financial and legal advisor named Peter Rashid, whose office was on the 4th floor of a brick building near the harbor. He was 60, direct, and had a wall full of credentials I didn't stop to read because I was already exhausted by the time I arrived. He reviewed the documents Harriet and I had flagged. His expression grew more measured with each page. When he reached the second co-signature form, one I had signed quickly while Callum was rushing me through a phone call, he stopped. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, "do you recall what this document authorized?" I told him I thought it was a reference form for a supplier account. He turned the page toward me. It contained a clause extending my personal financial liability to include any outstanding vendor balances Northline Creative accumulated within a 12-month window. I stared at the page. The words were real. My signature was real. But I had no memory of reading that clause. "I would advise you to stop all transfers immediately," Peter said. "And I would advise you to request a full accounting of all funds received by Whitfield Strategic Group from Northline's accounts." I drove home in the rain with both hands tight on the steering wheel. By the time I crossed back onto the island, I had made 2 decisions. The first was that I was done sending money. The second was harder. Because it meant admitting something I had been refusing to see for months, that somewhere along the way, I had stopped being Callum's mother and become his bank. And banks, eventually, close. That night I sat at my kitchen table with Leonard's photograph on the counter beside me and drafted an email to Callum. I rewrote it 4 times. I deleted every version that sounded like pleading. I deleted every version that sounded angry. What remained, finally, was something that felt true. I told him I was pausing all financial support effective immediately. I told him I was requesting a full accounting of funds and a complete review of the arrangement with Whitfield Strategic Group. And I told him, and this part took me the longest to write, that I loved him, but that love did not require me to be afraid to ask questions. I pressed send. Then I went to bed and did not sleep at all. The first call came before 7 the next morning, then 3 more before noon. Then a voicemail, Callum's voice tight and careful, saying that I had created a cash flow crisis and that payroll for his 2 employees was due Friday. Not, "Are you okay, Mom?" Not, "Can we talk?" Only, "The money." The second voicemail came 2 hours later. This time he sounded less controlled. "Jade said this might happen. She said you'd panic once things got complicated." I sat with that sentence for a long time. 3 days later, my daughter-in-law, or, rather, the woman I had already started to understand would not be my daughter-in-law for long, called me directly. Jade's voice was warm and measured, the professional warmth of someone who had learned to manage difficult situations. "Evelyn, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I want you to feel included in Callum's journey." Included. I thanked her and said I'd be happy to review any financial documentation she wanted to share. There was a brief pause. "Of course! I'll have Callum send something over." Nothing was ever sent. On a Friday evening in December, Callum arrived at my door unannounced. The sky was dark by 4:30, the way it gets on the island in winter, and he was standing on the porch looking younger than he had in years. Not in a good way. In the way that exhaustion strips things back until a person looks like an earlier version of themselves. I made tea. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where he had shown me the Northline website 2 years earlier with hope in his eyes. For a long time, neither of us said much. Then he said, "Jade told her clients I'm the creative director." Her clients, not Northline's. I kept my hands around my mug. "What does that mean?" He stared at the table. "She's been using the studio's equipment, the office address, our client relationships, to position herself. Northline has basically become infrastructure for her own business development." The cold clarity of it moved through me slowly. Callum looked up. "I found invoices she sent to 3 companies I introduced her to, billing them directly through Whitfield Strategic Group." "Not through Northline?" I asked quietly. "How long?" He shook his head. "I don't know. At least a year. Maybe longer." I thought about the neon sign, the new furniture, the credenza full of branded folders with her company's logo. She had been moving in while he was still calling it his. "Did you know?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him carefully. "That she was building something inside your business using your resources?" He nodded once. "I suspected something was wrong," I said. I didn't know exactly what. His jaw tightened. You tried to tell me.
I hadn't directly.
But I had asked questions he deflected. I had raised concerns he explained away. And every time I hesitated over a check or asked to see an invoice, he had made me feel like caution was the same as abandonment. I said that, gently. He was quiet for a long time after. Then he said, She told me you were holding me back because you were afraid of watching me outgrow you. The words landed somewhere I hadn't expected. Not because they were cruel, though they were, but because I recognized the shape of them. That's a very specific thing to say to a son about his mother. Specific enough to be practiced. I asked him if he believed it. He looked at the table. For a while, yeah. I think I did. That honesty was the first real thing he'd given me in over a year. I held it carefully. That night, after Callum left, I walked into the spare room where Leonard used to keep his tools. Clean and ordered in their cases the way only a working man who respects his equipment keeps things. I sat on the edge of the old workbench and looked at the shelf where Leonard's handwriting was still there in black marker. On a strip of masking tape, cables, misc, fittings, spare connectors, Leonard's handwriting. He had been gone over 2 years and I still couldn't read it without having to take a breath first. I thought about what he would have made of all this. Leonard was not a complicated man, but he read people with a kind of quiet accuracy that I had always taken for granted. He had met Jade once, at a work event. Callum brought me to early in the relationship, and on the drive home he had said only one thing. She speaks as though she's already decided what the outcome will be. I had thought it was just Leonard's skepticism about people who dressed better than him. Now I understood it differently. The following week, Harriet came with me to a second meeting with Peter Rashid. We brought every document we had, including printed records of transfers, the co-signature liability clause, and something Callum had quietly emailed me the night before. Internal communications between Jade and a contact at one of the companies she had diverted from Northline. Peter read them carefully. His expression did not change much, but there was a particular stillness in the way he set down the last page. There's potential grounds here for a breach of fiduciary responsibility claim, he said. If her consulting arrangement was undisclosed to the full extent of its scope, and if she was actively redirecting clients and revenue while receiving compensation from Northline's accounts. He left the sentence open. What does Callum want to do? He asked. Harriet looked at me. I think, I said carefully, that Callum is still deciding who he is in this story. Peter nodded slowly. That's an honest answer. What happened after that did not happen quickly, because real things rarely do. Jade Whitfield did not disappear dramatically. She withdrew gradually, the way people do when they sense that the arrangement they've built is about to be examined too closely. She stopped coming into the office every day. Her replies to Callum's messages became shorter. When he finally confronted her with the diverted client communications, she told him it was all a misunderstanding about billing structures, and that his mother had poisoned the relationship from the beginning. He called me that evening. His voice was flat in the way voices get when the thing you believed turned out to be exactly what you were warned it might be. She brought you up, even then. I know, I said. How did you know she wasn't right about you? I thought about that for a moment, because I asked myself whether my concerns were about protecting you or protecting myself, and every time I checked, the answer was you. He didn't say anything for a while. Then I should have asked that question a long time ago. Northline Creative did not close, but it was smaller after. 2 employees became one. The downtown office became a shared workspace with a monthly arrangement instead of a long-term lease. The luxury real estate strategy was quietly abandoned in favor of the kind of clients Callum had started with: local, real, work that required craft rather than the appearance of it. He told me once, a few months later, that going back to the small clients felt embarrassing at first, like admitting failure. Then the brewery in Saanich took him back. Same-day rate, no questions asked. And he drove home from that meeting and called me from the parking lot. They didn't even bring it up, he said, almost surprised. That's what decent people do, I told him. He was quiet for a moment. You knew people like that my whole life. I just stopped paying attention. I don't know exactly when the shift happened. Healing doesn't arrive as an event. It arrives as a series of very ordinary moments that you only recognize later as having mattered. A Sunday phone call that lasts longer than expected. A shared meal where nobody talks about money. Callum showing up one afternoon to fix the back gate Leonard had always meant to get to. Spending 2 hours in the yard with tools he borrowed from the garage, doing the work carefully, quietly, the way his father would have. I stood at the kitchen window and watched him. The light was doing that particular late afternoon thing the West Coast does. In early spring, gold coming through the fir trees at an angle that makes everything look briefly like it's been treated kindly. Leonard would have been out there with him. That thought arrived without the immediate weight it used to carry. Just a quiet acknowledgement. A true thing, resting gently. There's a version of this story where I stay silent. Where I keep signing forms and transferring money because asking questions felt like withholding love, and I had confused the two for long enough that the confusion felt like loyalty. I almost lived that version. What stopped me wasn't courage, exactly. It was something smaller. A morning when I looked at the savings account, with Leonard's handwriting on the folder, and thought, he saved this for Callum's actual future, not for someone else's leverage. That distinction took me too long to act on, and I won't pretend otherwise. But I did act, eventually. And acting, even late, turned out to matter. If you've ever had to protect yourself from someone you were trying to protect, you'll understand the particular quiet that comes after. Not peace, exactly. Not resolution. Just an honest view of things. Finally, without the noise. That's what I have now. And some days it's enough. Please like this video if this story stayed with you, and subscribe if you want to hear more. Tell me in the comments whether you think I was right to finally say no. I'd love to know where you stand. And let me know your city and the time there right now. You might be surprised how many people are watching from places just like yours, asking themselves the same questions you are.